Yellow means that we had a negative number, but it was within one of those statistical test ranges. So we got kind of a warning at that point. You'll also see green on some of these charts, which means it was negative, but we didn't have 40. When we didn't have 40, the rules don't apply. So that's important to know. In this case, what we're looking at, though, you really can't compare year to year this way because the AMOs going up on the proficiency indices are going down. But what you can do is compare the gaps between the kids. Like this is looking at poverty versus all students. So in 2005, there was a 17 percentage point gap between our students who are on free reduced lunch and all the students. Our special ed students, there was about a 20% gap between our special ed students and all students. And so we can compare those gaps from year to year because the relative differences between those points are comparable. What we've done is take poverty, special ed, our limited English proficient students, black and white, Hispanic white, Asian white, and we've calculated that gap, and then we've seen what's happened over the last 6 years in regard to the magnitude of those gaps. And you'll see in 2005, that's the last time we were in improvement goal, and those gaps were pretty high, but we were able to close those gaps. And then at grade 3-5, this is the reading category here. In grade 3-5, those gaps stayed the same. Now, the gaps staying the same doesn't mean we didn't make improvement in those kids. Those kids did improve because, again, what was going up every year? AMOs were going up every year. So in order to keep the gap the same size, the special education students and whatever else is flat there, they had to be going up as well, but they're going up at the same rate that the AMOs are going up. So you're not closing the gap, but you're not widening the gap either. So you're making improvement, but in order to improve in an area where you have an achievement gap, you have to accelerate that improvement in order to close the gap. And what those flat trajectories indicate there is in reading, we're basically improving at the same rate as the AMOs have been going up. We're not improving at a rate greater than the AMOs. Special ed is obviously the widest gap for reading. It's also the widest gap for math. I find it interesting that our LEP kids, this is the green bar that you see here, that's our limited English kids. In math, you're going to see them track a lot, the gap's going to be a lot smaller. That's because they tend to do a lot better when it's math problems than it is reading problems that they're working with. And that makes sense if they're still learning English as a language. We'll flip on over to our middle school span. And the only negative we've had here in the last 6 years was in 2005 with special ed. And the interesting thing here is the gap. Notice instead of a flat line, most of these lines are going downward. So that means that we've not just been keeping up with the AMOs, we've actually been accelerating the closure of the gaps at that middle school level. That's good news for our middle schools, and we really need to applaud them and recognize the hard work they've been doing. In both reading and math, you see that overall trend, closing of the gap, and that's happening at the same time those AMOs are ramping up. So that's a remarkable achievement. But again, you see our special education kids at that upper end there, and again, that's our challenge. I really want to know what happened here with regard to, because that was a pretty dramatic drop at reading in middle school and with special ed. And then we look at high school, grade 11, and we see a lot more color. Part of the problem here is we're only dealing with grade 11. Middle schools are tested at all 3 grades, 6, 7, and 8. Elementary schools are tested in half of their grades, 3 through 5. But the high schools are only tested in 1 grade level. So the population is only based on grade 11. And if you'll see, we've struggled with special ed at the high school level, just like the state has and everybody else has, ever since we started keeping records on this. And in 2008, we got a pass just because there weren't, even at the system level, 40 kids that constituted an in-group for that level. So when we put Hoover High School and Spain Park High School 11th grades together, that goes into the system results. And you see again, special ed has been a flat trajectory there, but that doesn't mean they haven't been making improvement. They have been making improvement, or else that gap would be going up. But again, look at our racial ethnic groups, and our poverty is basically trending down. So our high schools have been making substantial improvements with the racial ethnic poverty groups, but we're basically flat with our special education group.
Ron,
Yes?
Some of this, I think, should be really important when you factor in transiency, particularly grades 3 through 8, because we got kids who'll come in here in 5th grade and not be part of the continuum, and they're at a learning disadvantage when they walk through the doors. So, I mean, is there a way to overlay that situation? Because I know some schools, we have very high transiency rate in terms of kids coming and going.
I think we can try to do that. I think we need to look at it.
Is that not a factor?
It is a factor, and when we have looked at transiency, it has been, it's not the ultimate source of the issue, but it does contribute to it. And certainly at 6th grade and 9th grade is where we see the results the most. That's where we have the most income and outgoing is in that 6th grade transition and in that 9th grade transition to school. So that would certainly make another level of analysis for us to go to. I think you're right.
But if you got them coming in 6th grade, which is a very high, and you said our middle schools are very, very strong, then that really has no bearing there, then, does it?
No, and I think I think it shows what a good job the schools are doing with the kids in terms of taking them where they are and getting them where they need to be. Go back to this. And then there's that additional academic indicator, which at elementary school is attendance rate, and that's attendance rate across the whole year. This year we had to contend with the H1N1 flu, but we still met the goal in that category. And in high school, it's graduation rate, and there the goal is 90% for each high school. And of course, that formula is going to be changing in a couple of years. We're going to have to deal with that change, but right now both of our high schools are meeting that goal. Some of the challenges that we found with implementing No Child Left Behind. The end size is something that we really struggle with as a large and diverse school district, because only counting these penalties or labels to schools if they have 40 kids holds larger schools and schools with more diverse populations to a higher standard than smaller, less diverse schools. It just simply matters. If you have 40 special ed kids, you'll get a red cell or a green cell in this category. If you don't have 40 kids, if you have 38 kids that fall in this category, you could have a negative 70 proficiency gap there, and you would still make AYP because you didn't have 40 kids. And that's the case in a lot of the schools you look at across the state with their scorecards. You'll see passes made AYP, but you'll also see negatives in those special ed numbers, and sometimes they're pretty sizable negative numbers. Another problem we have with it is the disproportionate response. The determination as to whether a school has met AYP or not met AYP is the same whether that school failed to meet 1 or 37 different goals. It's all or nothing. And that's, if we graded our kids that way in school, parents would burn the buildings down pretty quickly. So there's got to be a more proportionate response to the way we're doing. Does not doing well in one goal mean you have totally failed as a school? Absolutely not. And so hopefully this is going to be something that comes out in the reauthorization. Another one is I label irrational distinctions. There's no rational acknowledgement of the reason behind the gaps which exist behind these Nickleby-defined subpopulations. The primary cause of the gaps between racial and ethnic groups is poverty. That's been well established in research going back 30, 40 years. So it's not the color of a person's skin that leads to differences in achievement. It's the poverty rate that's associated with those differences. So why aren't we addressing the poverty category as the primary base behind that area, and instead of having all these labels for different groups, which are all associated ultimately with poverty? And within this group of special education, this could be a very broad and diverse spectrum of kids. Special education is not one kind of problem. It's lots of individual kinds of problems with kids that are significant. And yet we're lumping them into this one pot and holding them to the same standard regardless of what that means contains. We have one law, IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which requires us to treat these students as individuals, to prepare an individual education plan for them, and to measure their success against that individual plan. Then we have another federal law, No Child Left Behind, which requires us to put all these kids into one pot and hold them to the same standards as every other student in the school. That just doesn't equate with me. So I'm really frustrated with that, with the category and definition of that group. We put, Dr. Mayer helped me with some percentages here to show in Hoover, we identify a lot fewer kids in special ed in the state or the nation. And that's been a problem in special ed that has been dealing with that community for decades, has been over-identification of kids. Moving kids out of the classroom who just might be too much trouble for a teacher and shuffling them off to the special ed teacher. We don't do that. We have one of the lowest identification rates for special ed. So our kids are needy kids. They're kids with significant problems, and we try to get as much attention and resources as we can to them to meet their individual needs. But again, we're being held up to a different standard for that group. And finally, again, the tests are administered in English. LEP students move out of this category once they begin to become English proficient. They're not in LEP anymore. So how do you ever get a win in this column if the kids move out of the group once they begin to speak and read English? How do you get a win in special ed when a special ed student begins to achieve at grade level and they move out of the special ed category? How do you ever get a win in that category if you have a group that's defined by the fact that they are achieving below the performance of the peers? So that's a real struggle that we have with it. All of these are things that have been brought up locally, state, nationally. There's lots of groups arguing for revisions in this direction when Congress goes through reauthorization. The question is, when is Congress going to go through reauthorization? And we don't know. So we're going to have to write out the law as it exists now and hope that when Congress, after the elections, Congress can deal with this and add some reason to what we're struggling with. So what happened this year? At the system level, we made AYP, but there were specific goals identified in elementary and high school grade spans which require attention. And I want to drill down and look at those real quick. This is what our report card looks like for the system. See, at grade 3-5, we did not make AYP in reading and math, and we did not make it in reading at the high school span. But we did make it as a system, because as a system, as a district, you have to fail across all three spans in one of those categories in order to not make AYP. But because we had those high scores in middle school in this area, we did not run into that problem. When we look at the specific spans, this is what the report card looks like. You've got the reading category. This looks the same for schools and districts and everywhere. You got the reading category with those 9 subpopulations we talked about. You've got the math category with those 9 subpopulations we talked about. And then you've got that additional academic indicator. And this is the grade 3-5 span, and it says the system met 31 out of 33 goals. We did not make AYP for special education at that level. So why did all of our elementary schools make AYP? Well, remember, how many students do you have to count?
40.
40. And none of our elementary schools had 40 or more in their group in order to apply. So while we had negative points in this category, some of our elementary schools, we did not have a group of 40. But when you add up all of those kids from all the schools, you've got a group that's over 40. So as a system, we're held accountable for them, but as individual schools, they are not. That's kind of confusing. Same thing with math. But we did meet the additional academic indicator, the attendance rate. This is the middle school span, and you see we got all greens and all positive indice numbers at this point at middle school. So that was great. And then this is our high school span. We did not, when Hoover High and Spain Park High were put together in the area of special education, we did not make AYP. We had a high enough population at Hoover High to count. We did not have a high enough population at Spain Park High School to count. Both high schools were negative in this category. So that's the system